Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. At the November 2010 election, the Madison County, Illinois State's Attorney William Mudge was elected to be a circuit judge in the Illinois Third Judicial Circuit. The County Board Chairman Alan Dunstan appointed Tom Gibbons, an assistant state's attorney, to replace Mr. Mudge. With drug crimes on the rise, Mr. Gibbons has launched an aggressive campaign against drug dealers trafficking narcotics in Madison County, prosecuting dealers in overdose cases, eliminating plea bargaining, and demanding prison time. He's also joined a public awareness campaign to educate the public about the steep rise in deaths and addiction caused by the availability of inexpensive drugs. Tom Gibbons, welcome to Conversation.
Lee, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, we are glad to have you here. It's a very serious subject that we're going to, well, we might get to some other things, but I do want to focus at first on this, this drug issue. It's interesting, it was right here on this set a number of months ago. We had Steve Nunn, who is the coroner of Madison County, and we were just doing a straight-up interview about, well, what's the coroner do and all this. And at the very end, in the last 5 minutes, I just said, well, is there anything you wanted to talk about? And boom, he hits me with this heroin issue. And I had not really learned about this until that very moment, which shame on me for not knowing. But now we're talking about it, and so I wanted to get in, and so from the beginning, you explain what the situation is.
Well, as you said, I was appointed state's attorney and sworn in December of 2010. And immediately upon taking office, I started reviewing the cases as they came in, our felony charges, and something I noticed that was striking was that we had a large number of heroin possession cases and distribution of heroin cases, so dealing cases. And you know, I think I had probably the same thoughts about heroin as many people do, and in my experience talking to people, that you think of heroin as sort of a junkie drug in the back alleys and not something that was part of any regular part of our culture. But I quickly learned that the cops out on the street and the undercover agents, that they were coming across heroin in greater and greater quantities, and it was much more available. Of course, in January of 2011, we had the death of Shannon Gaddis, who was a 17-year-old girl from Troy. And I think that...
See, and that's surprising probably because heroin is thought to be in the other areas of the county.
Well, I think that was people's initial thought or stereotype of heroin. But what we learned is that she had overdosed on heroin. It had been injected into her, and she died. And that was something that really kind of sent a shock through the law enforcement community. And at that point in time, our new U.S. Attorney, Steve Wigington, and I, he and I worked together at the state's attorney's office as prosecutors, and our coroner, Steve Nunn, our sheriff, the state's attorney in St. Clair County, and our partners in really at the local, state, and federal level all started getting together, and we realized we had a problem, and we knew that we needed to do something about it. And so we started an initiative to change the way that we're handling these types of cases and to take a much more aggressive stance against them, not just on the street with the cops, but once they get to the courtroom as well.
So what was it before, and then explain what your new stance is?
Well, heroin really wasn't present so much. It hadn't permeated into our schools. It hadn't permeated into our communities in the past, and so this was something new that we were seeing. And as we started experiencing a very high number of overdoses and then a high number of deaths from it, we realized that this was a new problem. This is something we'd never experienced before. And as the heroin came into the community and the Drug Enforcement Agency and other law enforcement started looking at what was actually coming in, they realized that, number one, it was extremely potent, much more potent than it had been back in, say, the 70s, 80s, 90s, that, you know, that old junkie drug they talked about. And what that did was, with those increased potencies and the lower cost, it's fairly inexpensive, $10 for, they call it a button is a hit. And that made it available to a whole new group of people. and it was being introduced to young people in schools and at parties, and the stigma of putting a needle in your arm was enough for just about everybody to never think about trying heroin. But with the increased potency, they could snort it now. And I think that that way of bringing it into their bodies, ingesting it, opened it up and made it seem more acceptable to young people and people who certainly would have been afraid of a needle. Mm-hmm. And so we saw that this was a new problem with new challenges for us. So we got together with law enforcement and we started looking at how these cases are being handled and investigated. And one of the things we started focusing on was overdoses. And the fact that our hospitals were receiving so many overdose cases, not necessarily deaths. Well, when someone overdoses, they have drugs, and those drugs came from somewhere. So we are now investigating overdose scenes as crime scenes. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the big changes, really a sea change in law enforcement. And our partners at the Sheriff's Department, in the state police, all of our local law enforcement agencies and federal agencies have partnered up and teamed up to make sure that when we get to those scenes, everybody knows what to do. They lock it down, they collect the evidence, and what we're looking for is we're looking for the source. We want to know where it came from, and we're going to follow that source back as far as we can and prosecute everybody up the chain.
And what success are we having?
Well, so far we've had some pretty good success. Now this is something new, and it takes time. A lot of these investigations involve techniques, for example, of searching cell phone records and text records, because a lot of the communication for drug dealing happens on cell phones and by text. Mm-hmm. And so we have some new tools. I know Madison County Sheriff's Department has an extraordinary tool called a Cellbrite, and we're in the process of expanding availability of Cellbrite technology around the county. And that allows officers on the scene to plug cell phones in and download the data, the text messages, the phone records, and immediately start investigating, finding out, making the connections and connecting the dots as to who that heroin came from. And we have filed numerous charges now against individuals for delivering heroin to people who then overdose, or in the cases of death, to those who die.
Did I read recently that there was a death in, was it Roxana, South Roxana or something?
Yes.
Tell that story.
Well, it was back in the summer of 2011. I think it was about 5 or 6 months ago now. And really a tragic story. A young child shows up at a neighbor's house and says, Mommy can't talk anymore. And the police were called, and what they discovered is that the two adults in the home, the mother and the mother's boyfriend, had both nodded off from using drugs. And the mom had actually died. She had overdosed on heroin. And this was the life that child lived, and that's who had to tell the story of her death. And that Bobby Coles from the South Roxana Police Department did an extraordinary investigation in conjunction with other officers from other departments, and they tracked the cell phone records, and they did a really great on-the-ground investigation and discovered that in fact the dealer had come from St. Louis and come here. And so he's now being prosecuted for having come here, delivered the drugs, which ultimately led to her death. So what we're doing is we're looking for the source. Now, this person in this particular case, I think it would be, the investigation would identify this person as what folks would think of as a normal drug dealer, a person who's regularly engaged in that. I think that's how they would characterize this person, or he might characterize himself. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we're doing differently now is we're trying to change the mindset of folks, of understanding the concept of who is a drug dealer and how do drugs get delivered into our community. Most of the cases that we're seeing and the evidence across the region and at local, state, and federal levels is that most of the heroin in our area comes from North St. Louis, and that it is coming into our community by people driving to North St. Louis and bringing it back. Well, the person in North St. Louis is someone who we would traditionally refer to as the drug dealer. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I'm asking folks to do, and when I speak about this publicly, is I'm asking them to think about the people who went to get it and brought it back as drug dealers as well. Because when they get back, they don't just use it themselves. They spread it around a community of addicts. They give it to people. They're sharing it. They are part of the delivery system. they're like middlemen now. They've become part of the drug distribution network, and they need to be held accountable, because if they weren't doing it, some of these overdoses and deaths wouldn't happen, and these drugs wouldn't be in our community. So I'm asking folks and talking to folks publicly about us expanding our understanding of what it means to be a drug dealer.
You're not just talking about adults either, are you?
No, we have...
You're talking about 15, 16, people who can drive a car, old enough but are still in high school.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons we're targeting the schools with our education campaign. We're going around with our U.S. attorney, our coroner, our sheriff, other people in law enforcement, myself. We've gone and conducted forums at high schools around the area. We're continuing to do that, just to reach out to parents and talk to them, to students, to others in education, that this is a problem that's starting very young. And of course, the death of that poor 17-year-old young lady, that affirmed for us that this is a problem. We've had teenagers dropped off, dumped really, at hospital emergency rooms, suffering overdoses. This is something that stretches down into the schools. And so this is a problem for parents and students and schools and really the whole community.
Well, when you're talking to the students in particular, are they concerned themselves, or is this like, it's not going to happen to me, or I mean, what is the attitude of some of the young people?
Well, I think that most of them are confirming what we were suspicious of, and that's the fact that it is readily available. Heroin is available, and some of them have told me it's more available than things like marijuana, that it's so easy to come by, and it's really inexpensive. And that's something that is extremely troubling. The ready availability of something so deadly and so addictive it really signals to me that this is an epidemic. This is something that we have to take extraordinary measures to deal with.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I was a high school kid, and heroin, as you started out saying at the beginning of the show, heroin was that, one shot and you're good for your whole life kind of drug. You don't want to be involved in that. That's only stupid people were ever involved in heroin. Mm-hmm. What is it that has occurred during my lifetime to suddenly make young people think that somehow this is okay?
Well, I think there have been a couple of things that have happened. First of all, I think heroin was so completely absent from the national scene and the local scene that no one talked about it. There's been no education. Drug education hasn't focused on it as a problem because it hasn't been here. Mm-hmm. The DEA will tell us that starting in about 2005, the drug cartels recognized an opening in the market in the United States for opiates.
Which drug cartels are we talking about? The ones from Afghanistan or the ones from Mexico?
Well, I think the DEA would tell you it's South American, Mexican, and Asian, so including Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And one of the factors that is cited regularly is the availability of opiate-based painkillers here in the United States. A statistic that I read recently told me that in the United States every year we prescribe 200 million prescriptions for opiate-based painkillers. Now there are only about 300 million of us in this country, mm-hmm. which tells me that those painkillers like the Vicodins and the Oxycontins.
That's the hydrocodone you're talking about.
Yeah, those types of prescription drugs are being given out in very high numbers and with great frequency. And so there has been a long-standing problem with the abuse of prescription drugs. Mm-hmm. They're available in many homes. Folks will receive a prescription and not take them all or not take them at all and put them in the medicine cabinet. And so they've been in the medicine cabinets of moms and dads and aunts and uncles and grandparents for years. And unfortunately, there are young people and people of all ages really that are raiding those medicine cabinets and putting those pills out on the street. What that has led to is the rise in addiction to the opiates, a taste for this opiate addiction mm-hmm. That was really began with the prescription pills. Now, we've been fighting the prescription pill problem for a long time. Drug agents have been seeing this and police have been seeing this on the street for a long time. And so we've been attacking that problem and trying to make them less available. They are harder to come by and they're more expensive because of that. But unfortunately, there are a great number of people who are addicted to these. And I heard a story in Collinsville about a month ago from a young man who was a heroin addict, a recovering addict. And what he said was he had been on the pills for years. And one time when he couldn't afford the pills, he went to his dealer. And his dealer said, well, I can give you heroin. It's only $10. It's much cheaper. And he needed, as an addict, he felt like he needed to have something. So that's when he tried heroin for the first time. And when he tells that story, it just confirms what we've been hearing all along, is that the prescription pills are a true gateway into the use of heroin. And while he began by snorting the drug, what we're learning from most addicts is that's a very quick path to the needle. They can only snort it for a short period of time until they need greater and greater amounts, and that's when they get on the needle.
I noticed that you haven't mentioned the word alcohol in any of this discussion so far. Is alcohol passé, or you just haven't talked about it?
No, I think alcohol is also part of the problem. I think in circumstances where there's permissive use and permissive availability to young people of any kind of substance, any kind of intoxicating substance, what we learn is that these things, the term gateway was originally applied to marijuana, for example. It was called a gateway drug. And I think folks...
And there was a lot of people arguing, oh, don't be silly.
Well, I think the way that it was explained was that using a particular substance, say marijuana in this example, made you want to do something else.
Right.
And I think that what we've learned, we've gotten smarter over the years as we've been tackling this problem. What we learned is that what it doesn't necessarily lead you or make you do something else, but it expands your sphere of influence. The people that young people hang around with, if they start using alcohol, is different than those that they hang around with if they're not using alcohol. The same with marijuana and other drugs. If you start hanging around with and being with the people who are using drugs, your sphere of influence expands to people who are using other drugs. And so it's the people that they're around, and their peer group changes. They start spending time with people who are using other drugs, and that's when that becomes more readily available to them. And so this is alcohol and marijuana and prescription pills are all part of this process. Most addicts will tell you they begin with alcohol. And in my experience, the heroin addicts, I was young and I started drinking alcohol and led to all these things. And so it's a part of the problem as well. But we have to look at the whole problem. Right now with the deaths from heroin overdose, this is really just a terrible epidemic. I think our statistics for last year, we have 25 confirmed deaths, and I believe there's still some cases under review. On New Year's Day, we had 2 new heroin overdose deaths reported in the news. This is something that we have got to tackle head on.
Yeah, the coroner was like just amazed at the number of deaths here in Madison County that for this would have been 2011, and it was just unheard of. Unheard of. I mean, that's why he brought it up out of the clear blue. In your discussions with young people and parents, has there been a change of attitude among high school kids yet? And maybe junior high kids, middle school, I guess it's called now. Kind of a revulsion. Wow. Have we reached that point yet, or is it still, it's still like, yeah, well, I'm over here, they're over there, let them do their thing?
I think we still have a lot of work to do. I think that we have a lot of programs that we're implementing. There's a lot of communication going on, and we're getting the word out, but we have a lot of work to do. This is a big problem, and this is a big county. Madison County has 268,000 residents, a lot of different areas. So we're trying to reach out to all the areas and talk to people. There are still people who, when you say the word heroin to them, they give you a very strange look because they haven't heard that word in a long time. And so we're still overcoming that initial lack of information in the public. But we as public officials, as the chief law enforcement officer for Madison County, I have an obligation not just to prosecute criminals in court. I also have an obligation to serve the public and to provide public information. And so I take that very seriously. I have 2 young boys, 7 and 11. And I have to make sure that the future that they're facing here in Madison County doesn't include heroin as an option for them or as a problem they may face.
Hopefully not. any drugs or alcohol.
Sure.
Well, no, I know what I was going to ask you. Doctors, primary care physicians, are they being brought into this process to help educate parents?
We do have some people in the medical field. We have people in the treatment field that are joining the effort. We keep enlisting more and more partners in this effort. We're always inviting and welcoming anyone who is willing to join the conversation.
It just seemed to me that, you know, parents are taking their kids to, you know, to the doctor, and it wouldn't be so bad if the doctor maybe had a little talk, even a private little talk with some young people, just to let them know, hey, you're going to see this, here's what happens to your body if you do that.
Yeah, I've spoken to some doctors personally, and I know that there are others that are communicating. We're trying to get the message, trying to find a way to help deliver the message through the medical community to make sure that that message is getting out, and that's part of their dialogue. You know, again, this is an effort in terms of public education that's going to require a lot of work. And we're reaching out in every possible direction to make sure that we get the message out.
I know that the county superintendent of schools is been involved in this, and I'm sure that all the other, you know, superintendents, Collinsville, Edwardsville, et cetera, they're probably well engaged here. So hopefully young people will get the message. Although it's not just young people, is it? I mean, you're what did I hear? Some of the people involved are in their 50s, 60s,
Sure.
70s.
Sure. Yeah, this is not this particular drug doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care how old you are, how rich or poor you are, or where you live. We find it at all levels of society, all economic levels, and we find it in every community. I think that the citizens of Highland, for example, were very surprised that late this summer when we did an early morning raid and executed 19 search warrants and arrested search and arrest warrants for defendants that were trafficking in heroin in Highland and other drugs.
I bet they were shocked
in a community,
in a place like Highland.
A place like Highland, a great community. I went to high school in Highland. It's just a really solid and tremendous community to live in. But they have a very proactive police department, and they recognize this problem early, and they've been attacking it, and they are aggressive. They brought together resources from our sheriff's department, state police, the DEA, the U.S. Marshals, my office. I was there personally early in the morning, out with them on the street, picking up defendants, and they saw a problem in their community and they attacked it. And that's the kind of model that we've seen repeated in so many communities around Madison County and around the region, is that law enforcement is really engaged on this, and they're not going to sweep it under the rug. Nobody's doing that. Everybody is attacking this head on and bringing it out into the light. So not only are we putting criminals behind bars, but we're also making sure that the public is aware and knows to watch out for this problem.
Do you have all the legal tools necessary? Has the legislature given you the necessary laws to do what needs to be done?
I think we have some tremendous laws on the books. We have great tools. We're able to prosecute people who deliver drugs that lead to overdoses.
Is this new, or is this has been there, just not been used?
I think it's been there, and it hasn't been something that has been used as much as it could be. I've definitely expanded the use of that statute, and I'm very aggressively trying to use that in cases where it applies, where we can get that information as to where the drugs came from. So I think we need to use the laws that are on the books. There are some things that we could do better. We can always have better laws. We can certainly have tougher drug sentencing laws. And I think in the cases of drug dealers, drug traffickers, for example, it's the policy of my office now that we do not offer probation, that we are consistently, in every case of drug dealing, asking for prison time. Now, we don't make up the sentences. Judges issue sentences. Right. But as the state's attorney, and the assistant state's attorneys in my office, we do not plea bargain to those cases.
Now, in the early days of this show, and we're now at our 11th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We had dealings with drug court, and you know the hurrah for drug court. And what is your feeling about? I mean, you just said that that almost seems like a plea bargain situation there. do you agree with the philosophy of drug court, or do you think that, or no?
I think that drug dealers should not be given the opportunity to shirk the responsibility for bringing drugs into the community and delivering them. However, addiction is not just a criminal problem. It's a medical problem, and it needs to be dealt with differently. We can't take every drug user or drug addict and throw them in prison. Right. Imagine the amount of prisons we would have to build in the state of Illinois and how we'd have to raise people's taxes to do something like that. Plus, we would turn people into hardened criminals by sending them to prison. The problem of addiction has to be addressed in a comprehensive way. And for those people who are eligible for drug court, who are not violent offenders and who are not dealers in drugs, those folks we need to have more creative and more thoughtful processes like drug court to try and turn their lives around. Everyone needs a path to redemption. If they haven't been a menace to society, we need to give them a path to redemption to try and turn their life around, to make them a productive citizen, a taxpayer again, and people who are taking care of their families and their responsibilities. Sending them to prison doesn't do it. It's also much more expensive to just simply put them behind bars. So it's, for many reasons, drug court is a good program. It's been very effective, and I think it's shown some great success. I would imagine, and again, the probation department would have to speak for themselves on this, but I would imagine that the problem with heroin addicts has really given them some trouble because this is an extraordinarily addictive drug.
I was going to say, we're down to like the last minute or two here. In this last minute or two, just address the recidivism rate of people who have gone through the through rehab.
Well, I think statistics will show you that with heroin addicts, the first attempt at rehab has somewhere between a 4% and 5% success rate, which is just abysmal. Yes. It's very, very disheartening. So I think that people in the treatment community have been doing a lot of work on this, trying to come up with new methods and new ways to deal with addiction. But it is a very tough problem, and it is causing a lot of damage to our society in general. All the theft, the increase in theft cases and burglaries and home break-ins, many of them are attributed to heroin addicts feeding their addiction. So we're having to tackle those problems with much tougher law enforcement efforts as well.
Yeah, I read some articles in the paper from, I think it was a fellow in Edwardsville who runs a clinic, and he was talking about just how difficult it is to overcome this problem, and also pointed out that it ain't cheap. Yeah. We're just, I guess we're really just about at the end of our time. I want to thank you very much for being with us today, Tom Gibbons, and I hope to have you again here in the future to talk about this and other subjects.
Thank you very much, Lee. I appreciate it, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you. And to the audience, I just want to tell you once again that I've been speaking with Tom Gibbons. He is the state's attorney for Madison County, Illinois. To everybody, we'll see you next week. Thank you.